Oh, hey, I'm glad you're here. Now, I know some of you are thinking, here's another long winded intro from Dirk. Well,
Innocence can be hell. Innocence can be hell. Can be hell. Innocence can be hell. Innocence can be hell.
greetings and salutations. This is VHS, and I'm your host, Dirk Marshall. For this special episode, we flip the format over to Screen Teens, where we talk to people about things they've seen on the big screen when they were a teen. My guest for this episode is the senior columnist at Daily Dead, a podcaster, and author of A Cut Below, a celebration of B horror movies 1950s to 1980s. Welcome, Scott Drebit.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for having me.
No, thank you for being here. First and foremost, where can people find you?
They can find me under several rocks. One would be over at Daily Dead, of course. As you mentioned, I've been there since 2015. As far as socials go, I'm over at Twitter at Phantasm2, same handle at Blue Sky, which I really dig. And you can also find me over on the Insta, and I'm trying my hand at the TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
That's a new frontier. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, that's like the big thing for authors now is that they're all told you got to have something over on the TikToks. And do you know who's really killing it on the TikToks in a hilarious way? Are you familiar with the writer Jason Pargin?
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, so he writes for like 1-900 Hot Dog, if you're familiar with that website that Sean Baby and Robert Brockway have. But he also wrote John Dies at the End, which Coscarelli directed a movie version of that. Yeah,
Okay,
there it is.
right.
There it
Okay.
is. But he has a new book coming out, and so he just goes to town on that TikTok with weird facts and things. I highly recommend checking it out because it might be inspiring for you with your vast knowledge of horror. Kind of a different thing, but could be
Yeah, I
something.
know my agent has been telling me to get on the book talk as it's the latest thing that everyone's doing, and I just have not had the time to delve into it, but I know that's an avenue that I really need to look at. And hey, I'm just a guy, I'm just an older guy trying to do his thing out here. But I think I can keep up. I think I can keep up
There you
with the
go.
younger kids. I can't see me doing any, don't expect any acrobatics or
No, no.
dance moves, possibly. Something will break.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Let's not do that.
no, let's not.
So let's talk about the book. When did this begin? This idea that you were like, I'm gonna write this book.
I have always loved review books, reference books, ever since I was a kid and would get my hands on magazines that would have regular reviews in them. Like usually, the rock and roll magazines like Rolling Stone, Cream, from the era that I was coming up in the the 70s and 80s, 80s adolescence. So I was always big on not only watching, for instance, Siskel and Ebert, but
Hmm.
reading Ebert's reviews, getting books that would have longer length pieces in it. Like John McCarty was a great that coined the term splatter movies.
Right, right.
Yeah, he had some great work. I've just always loved writing about horror. And so I hooked up with Daily Dead in 2015, and they were the only one I reached out to all the biggies, and Daily Dead was the only website or magazine that responded to me from the pieces that I had sent them, and they said, "Hey, do you want to do some kind of like column?" And I'm like, "That's precisely what I would like to do. I want to do a column that focuses on older horror movies." So that started the Drive and Dust Offs column at Daily Dead, which was a weekly column. Has over three, I think there's about 330
Wow.
in the archive. Obviously, in the past few years, it's been slowed down as I've been working on the book and putting that together. But that was kind of the genesis of this. I knew when I started doing the Drive and Dust Offs that I would like to see it into a book someday. And here we are.
There it is. And you said you've been working on it for 2.5 years, you said?
Yeah, I suppose so. Is when I started shopping. I had said to Jonathan James, my boss at Daily Dead, because we had always toyed around with the idea of, we'd love to put out a book of this stuff and these kind of pieces. So I'm like, well, let's do it. Let's get going. And I wanted to do the traditional route. I know
Mhm.
self-publishing is big, and I know it works for some people. But again, I just wanted to try it the traditional route first. So I lucked out with an agent, and then um, we put together the meat of the manuscript and polished that up as much as we could, and then we started shopping it around, and we ended up at McFarland, which is very much an academic publisher that deals mostly with academia and
Mhm.
libraries and such. So how I pulled one past, oh, I have no idea, but here we are. So yeah.
And I will say for people who have not read the book yet that I've read the first two chapters, and just because you said academia, it is informative, but it's also an entertaining read. I just want to put that out there so that people realize that it's not just facts.
I didn't want to do, ever since I've started writing about horror. Again, I knew I had two audiences that I wanted to write for. One was, of course, all the people who have been around for a while with horror and have been into horror. So I am writing to them, and to them, they already know some of the facts or
Sure.
most of the
Yeah.
facts. So I have to find a way to entertain
Mhm.
them. The information wise is for that new person
Mhm.
that I'm trying to entice and give them some background on this movie that I'm trying to get them to come over and see with the rest of us. So factoring in those two targets was kind of essential from the start of the kind of writing um, that I wanted to do. There are a lot of great books, serious books on horror that delve deep and far and wide on the topic in various areas. That's just not who I am,
Yeah.
Dirk, and I can't write like that. So I wanted to do something that was lighter,
Mhm.
like you said, that was informative, but overall, as the subtitle says, it's a celebration.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It feels like I can feel a voice of you in there, but there's also things that I'm reading that I'm like, oh, yeah, I should check this movie out. Or I haven't seen this in a long time, and now I have kind of a different perspective on it. So I can't wait to finish it and pick up a copy in print because I was just looking at it moments before we had a conversation. So, also, where can people find the book? Just at local bookstores? You said libraries?
Absolutely. Yeah, wherever again, McFarland mostly deals with in a wholesale manner with libraries, schools, etc. But if your favorite bookseller doesn't have it, ask them to bring it in.
Hmm.
It's as simple as that. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
Now, for anyone unfamiliar with our Screen Teens format, a guest is tasked with selecting a film seen in the theaters for each year that they were a teenager that left an impact and perhaps contributed a little bit to their taste in movies. They are allowed, however, one SPP or slumber party pick in the event that they saw something on the small screen or at a friend's house that left a larger impact for that year. Scott, was this a challenge for you?
Yes, it was a challenge, not in the early years.
That's really
Um,
interesting because these years that
as
you have
yeah,
are like, I would say, the hardest years.
they're easy for me until we get up into the final couple years,
Okay.
because I mean, there's a very good reason that, for instance, the book deals with movies that pretty much end by 87
Mm-hmm.
or so. And I did that. That was done on purpose because the quality starts to drop off. I find as we get to the end of the decade, and everything is tired. You know, the
Yeah.
slashing is has been done, and it's getting harder to. I looked up and down in 88 and 89. Those took me a little longer to land on a couple things. But the early years were a breeze. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think people will find it quite challenging for themselves to try to guess or pick through these years. Since I mentioned guessing, I will guess each time at what your favorite was, and I'll warn you, Scott, I'm quite a great guesser.
All right. Good, good.
So, without further ado, we will begin the Screen Teens of Scott Drebit. The year is 1983. A young Scott becomes a teen. Sayonara double digits, he's a teenager. Goodbye Cabbage Patch
Woo!
Kids and Star Wars toys. In a year where the Stray Cats release Rant and Rave with the Stray Cats, a long title, Def Leppard releases Pyromania, and David Bowie says to everyone, hey, let's dance. But was Scott celebrating the nationwide rollout of McDonald's Chicken McNuggets while listening to Huey Lewis and the News Sports album? Or was he crushed by the final episode of MASH airing to a measly 105 million people? Perhaps he was brushing up on his painting skills with the debut of Bob Ross's painting show. Yeah. In theaters, Star Wars Return of the Jedi tops box office, followed by Tootsie and Flashdance. But was the 13-year-old impressed with these films, or maybe more of a Porky's 2 the next day, or Black Stallion Returns? Only one person knows the answer, and luckily, they're right here. Scott, what'd you choose from 1983?
Okay. Well, I understand how this show plays now, and it's an instant aging machine. You didn't tell me that, Dirk.
sorry, sorry about that.
Okay, so here we are back in 1983.
Mm-hmm.
We'll even say the fall of 83. And what does this sprightly 13-year-old go and see at the theater? He goes and sees John Carpenter's Christine.
Whoa, yes. Oh, I'm super excited. I didn't even know that any of these picks were going to coincide with your book, but I'm loving what I'm hearing. Walk me through what that experience was like. Were you already aware of Carpenter as an entity, or was this, or are you just a car guy?
No, no, definitely. I mean, I like old automobiles. No, I was a Carpenter guy,
Okay.
and it was a King guy. It was, of course, the great confluence of interests. Yeah, Carpenter, I had already been a fan of since, I guess, 1978, when I was lucky enough to, my older brother snuck me and him into the movie theater by convincing the owner of the theater that we were locked out of the house. He was babysitting me. He was 14, I was 8, and he fell for it. And so I got to see Halloween
Wow.
when I was 8 with my older brother. So that was when Carpenter first hit for me. And then, you know, I didn't really hear much about him until I saw a Cinema Fantastique from, I think, 1980, that had a big article with him in it, and it was all about the fog, and it gave all the backstory on. That's how I learned of his, schooling
Hmm.
in filmmaking, etc. And that's where I began steeped into the Carpenter lore. So when I had heard that there was going to be a collaboration with the two, I was quite interested. And so I got Christine, which was a fat book, and it came out right before the movie because they had the galleys and whatnot. So I read the book before the movie. So I was stoked and I was ready. Again, it was just another great Carpenter movie. I felt it was more, and I still do. I definitely felt it was more of a better Carpenter movie than it was a Stephen King
Hmm.
movie per se, only because I thought the character of Arnie in the book was so, as per King, was so well fleshed out that the film didn't really allow for that because it's a movie, right?
Right, right.
And that was the choice that Carpenter made. I think the book is great by itself. I love that book. I mean, I haven't read it in 40 years, but I loved it when it came out. And I thought the movie was great. I thought it was just a great, stylish Carpenter, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one I saw on VHS in my dad's video store, and I wasn't like a car guy, so I'd see the cover every day, and it wasn't until I was at a friend's house and they had it, and they were like, "You haven't seen Christine, the killer car movie?" And I was like, "Well, now I want to watch it. I just never knew what it was before because I didn't know even Stephen King really at the time, so it was quite an experience seeing it on the small screen. I can't imagine the big screen, but I do want to hear for 1 second, although it's not the subject of the episode. What did you think seeing Halloween at 8?
Oh, Halloween at 8 was, for one, terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying during. My brother and I both found it very scary. And I had already seen a couple horror movies by that point
Okay.
already on TV, but also my first horror experience was at the age of 6. My mom took me to see Burnt Offerings in the theater.
That's incredible.
And that's what really set me on the path down the horror road.
Wow.
So by the time I'd seen Halloween, I'd seen a couple horror movies already, but nothing certainly of that intensity. And then after the movie, we're walking home. And again, it's late October, early November. I can't remember if this was right before or right after Halloween.
Yeah.
We're walking down the street and the wind's howling. And then you get home and the doors are
Right, right.
creaking. And like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, seeing Halloween at the age of 8 was, well, it was wonderful. It was
Yeah.
great.
That's incredible. So when I was a kid, I showed friends one of the Evil Dead movies. I think it was the first one, and then they had to walk home, and it was like fall and windy, and every gust of wind they thought was like, "Oh no!" And so they would start running. And then my other favorite moment was it was fall, and I was standing in our driveway just a couple years ago, and so the leaves. Oregon has beautiful fall, and so the leaves are falling and everything, and the wind is subtle, and so it's just perfect atmosphere. And the neighbor across the street's kid is learning piano, and their garage is opening. And what is he playing? But it's the theme from Halloween. And I like it was slow because he's learning it. And I like looked up and like looked down the street, which was empty, and then down the street the other way, which was empty. And I was like, what a rad moment just to be outside for. Like it was so great. All right, well,
I love that.
Christine's a great pick. Excellent selection. My guess was
Thank you.
was really close. I guessed the Smurf and the Magic Flute. So I was
Oh, this close.
so
Yeah.
so close.
So
All right.
close.
Well, another year has passed, and Scott is now 14, and the year is 1984.
Yeah.
Who could forget the year cowtails hit the candy aisles? But was a young Scott eating cowtails and washing it down with the newly released sliced soda while watching Hulk Hogan defeat the Iron Sheik? Or perhaps chilling in the room listening to Metallica Ride the Lightning and Sade's Diamond Life. Wham also makes it big, and Talking Heads stop making sense. Basketball shorts take the nation by storm, but was young Scott rocking those in Reeboks while waiting in line to see Star Trek III The Search for Spock? Or perhaps seeing Ghostbusters, which dominated this year, followed by Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Karate Kid, Footloose, Police Academy. You know what? People were right. 1984 is a crazy year for cinema, but perhaps Scott's more of a Silkwood guy. So please tell us, what did you choose for 1984?
Well, yeah, I did some of those things, and I watched and or purchased and or drank or ate some of those things
Yes,
that all
perfect.
happened. 84. Yeah, I'm going to go with Mr. Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, just so people know, you got to see Halloween in theaters and you got to see Nightmare on Elm Street in theater.
Yes.
You're a very fortunate person.
I am a very fortunate person. I also got to see Alien in theaters. So
I can't even. I was so
I know.
terrified when I saw Alien the first time. Like, yeah, okay. Well, all right, let's talk about this behemoth of a film.
Oh,
Okay, so were you seeing things leading up to it? Obviously, you already have horror on your mind, so I can't imagine before Nightmare on Elm Street and then, after. It's such a singular film.
yeah, it was the TV spots
Mm-hmm.
that really came to my attention. It had a good TV campaign and it had a good theatrical campaign as well. New Line was always good with
Mm-hmm.
trailers, I found. And having Wes Craven's name, okay, Wes Craven was Last House on the Left guy and he was Hills Have Eyes guy,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of it for the big ones, right? He hadn't Scream was way in the distance. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
his previous movie was Swamp Thing,
Mm-hmm.
so I wonder if this is going to be another great Wes Craven movie. You're just hoping it's going to be the good Wes Craven.
Yeah.
And what you ended up getting was something so much more, something that really, he was really able to tap into a primal fear in a lot of people that I don't think we know was ready to be tapped in
Yeah.
terms of movies, like what a great boogeyman. You're fine while you're awake, but he gets you when you sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're at your most vulnerable, that's when he's going to attack no matter what. It was great to see that character and really a supporting character in that first movie. He's
Mm-hmm.
like Peter Sellers in the first Pink Panther.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like a supporting character, but in that limited time that he's on screen, he is the character, he is the man of the movie. You identified with Heather right away. I was 14, she was supposed to be 17 or whatever, but you identified with her. He created these sympathetic characters. Plus, you throw in John Saxon as her dad and kick-ass
Yep.
sheriff as only he can be. Imaginative effects. Wow, like you said, it was kind of a point of no turning back.
Yeah.
It was certainly, again, at this point in the cycle of early 80s horror, slashers were already starting to wind down a little, unless your name was Friday the 13th, right? And this added a complete new dimension to horror and took it in directions that came around, I think, right at the right time.
Yeah, and I'm not like a scholar by any means on horror, but it also seems like an early film to do like the Italian dream logic type of thing that we had seen like in overseas films. Like I can't think of any other films that were like anything's possible kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, it had more of a European
Mm-hmm.
sensibility. Like you said, that nightmare logic, wasn't something in North America or North
Right.
American films that really applied to, unless you were seeing something at a drive-in or, a 42nd Street grindhouse, you're getting your Friday the 13th and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot that are very linear,
Mm-hmm.
as it were. And Nightmare on Elm Street, it plays out as you could take it as a slasher, but it has that supernatural cachet
Yeah.
to it that's steeped in that gives it that different element.
Yeah. And it's funny too because for younger generations that weren't around for these tentpole things like we're talking about with Friday the 13th and Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, it's hard to explain what it was like to get a new one because it wasn't like every year we get a Saw movie type of thing. It was like, Nightmare on Elm Street came out and it was legitimately terrifying. And then the second one came out and I was again legitimately terrified that this thing could like rip out of my body. It's like I love that sequence. And then see as it progresses and he becomes more of this like personality and things are, more jokes and he calls everyone a bitch, but like people often forget that he's really scary in the first films. And then there's the evolution of what happens with the character, but I recently went back and rewatched all the Nightmare on Elm Street films and I was even though I lived through when they were coming out,
Yeah.
slowly and you didn't know there'd be a new one and then it'd be like there's a new one and you're like what and yeah, it's a real treat. Nightmare on Elm Street's awesome. There's not much more I can say on the subject that hasn't been said a million times.
No, it's still, I'm with you. I haven't done a whole series watch in a long time, but I have watched the original
Yeah,
fairly recently. And yeah, it still holds up. I mean, and now we're talking 40 years later.
yeah,
And if it's still holding up by now,
yeah.
by the first 40 years, I think we're safe. It's earned its stripes.
And when they did the remake and they're like, we'll just do the wall thing CG, and you're like, this doesn't work. But you watch that original one, and it's great. It's a great sequence, you know, coming through the wall and getting sucked into the bed and the blood shooting up. And
Yeah, having a body push
yeah,
through latex.
yep.
Ta-da!
Yeah. And then you watch like the making ofs or the documentaries about the series with the special effects, like when they do the whole like chest with all the bodies pushing out through it and they actually
Yeah.
build the thing. And it's just like the artistry of the special effects artists. It's just, I just am in awe of all of it. It's really incredible to get to see. And like, you know, in the 80s, we didn't get to see any of that. And so now to have this treasure trove of someone being like, here's all the behind the scenes stuff you wondered about for 2 decades or more, you're like, ah, this is.
Yeah, you had to wait. There was in the video, in the Vidya, the heydays of the Vidya era,
Mm.
there was a couple. Fangoria put out some behind the scenes stuff, Scream Greats, Tom Savini.
Oh, okay.
But again, like you said, extremely boutique
Yes.
and
Yeah, yeah.
extremely like collector's item. It was here and then it would be gone kind
Yeah.
of thing. And now it's we get everything.
Everything.
Everything that is to be gotten, we're getting and gotten.
Yep. So true.
We've gone gotten.
And then
Gone.
they'll give it to us again in 4K. And then they'll give it to
It,
us again. And you're like, okay.
8K.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I need to see the moles on Jack Palance's face.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
That's why I watched Tango and Cash in 4K. My guess for you for 1984 was DC Cab. Yeah, little Mr. T movie for you. But so I was off, but that's all right.
DC Cab. I honestly have not seen that one since it came out. It's been 40 since I've seen.
Yeah, we had it in our video store. So
Did you?
the yellow box with Mr. T on the cover holding the door of a cab,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
the door, and I was just like, well, I'm gonna watch that movie. It tricked me a few
I
times.
bet it did. I bet it did very well at the video store.
Yeah, we rented it a ton. Yeah, I mean, Mr.
No
T, you
doubt.
could put him on anything really, and you know,
Oh, sure.
it worked. All right, well, seasons change and feelings change, and now Scott is 15 years old, and it's 1985. Kate Bush releases Hounds of Love, and ZZ Top releases Afterburner. Was a 15-year-old Scott munching on the BK Burger Buddies, which were small Burger King sliders sold in threes, while listening to Slayer Hell Awaits, or perhaps lounging in trousers and a slightly oversized sweater while playing Super Mario Bros. On the NES? Of course, it wasn't all coming up roses as Coke tries to change their recipe and release New Coke, which is a complete and utter nightmare that we as a country had to collectively push through. In theaters, however, the number one is Back to the Future, followed by Beverly Hills Cop, Rambo 2, Rocky 4, holy smokes. But maybe Scott's more of a View to a Kill guy, or Spies Like Us, or maybe Last Dragon, Fright Night, or Weird Science. I know I have my guess, but let's hear what Scott chose for 1985.
Wow. You know what? I saw in theaters every single one of those movies
I don't doubt it.
that you mentioned. I mean, again, it's the perfect storm of at the age where you're just going to everything.
Yep.
And it happened to be, another great year for
So good.
movies, especially if you're a horror fan or a comedy fan or adventure fan, it was all there. The one I chose, in fact, was indeed in the list that you had. And I struggled with this one because this one could go, there's a lot that I could have chose from,
Yeah.
but I ultimately ended up going with Fright Night.
Okay.
Because Fright Night was a revelation to me in the sense that I hadn't seen that entertaining of a vampire film that didn't feel old-fashioned or stodgy. It kind of had this hip modern feel to it. It felt very current. It was very funny. The effects are brilliant.
Yes.
And the performances are great. I thought it was a hilarious movie, and it still plays to this day.
I agree. I love Fright Night. This is something I saw on VHS at a friend's house, and it's actually the only movie that's ever given me a nightmare. And it's not a scary movie. It's the weirdest thing. I say this in an episode that will have come out by now, but that was my relationship to Fright Night forever. I didn't want to rewatch it. I was just like, I don't like that scary movie. Fright Night 2, I watched a ton of times. And then in my 40s, I was like, all right, I'm going to revisit. I might have been late 30s, revisit Fright Night. And I was like, oh, I love this. This is hilarious. But for some reason, when I was a kid, it scared the crap out of me. I think it was just the cover. I think the cover is what it was, the lady with the teeth. But yeah, I love Fright Night. Again, I'm so jealous that you got to see this on the big screen.
Yeah, like you said, something you just take for granted, right?
Yeah.
You're just going, movies were just there.
Yeah.
That's what was playing. And so that's what you went to. At this point, I was living in the Bahamas. And so we had one movie theater, and whatever was playing, that's what we went. But it had all the popular movies of the
Mhm.
day, and we were hopping a skip from Miami, so we were getting everything current.
Yeah.
But you just went. You weren't
Mhm.
thinking, wow, I'm glad I got to see this on the big screen, because there was no other option. It was just the big screen,
Right.
unless you're waiting 3 years for the network television premiere or something
Right.
like that, which wasn't, whatever. But yeah, no, it was great. I mean, it's a great looking film. Tom Holland directs the hell out of it. It sounded great. Again, I just foolishly, but you think everyone is seeing it the same way
Yeah.
you're seeing it, right? Yeah. So no, it was great. Of
Yeah.
course, it was awesome.
Well, my guess for you this year was Baby Secret of the Lost Legend. So
Wow, you're getting so close on
so
these.
I was just like, oh, baby dinosaur movie? Probably. No, just missed it.
I've never seen it. I did see Siskel and Ebert reviewing it, but I didn't see the movie.
Oh, did they like it?
I'm gonna go with no.
Okay. Because I didn't when I was a kid. But it's just one of
Fair.
those things that, like, growing up in a video store, a lot of the things that are like touchstones for me are different from people that were like just renting there because I was there like every day and just go down the aisle and watch every single thing. And so some of the things that stick out, I'm like, I'm sorry, this is a point of reference. When my wife knew baby, I was like, well, this wedding's definitely going to happen. This
It's
is,
meant to be.
yeah. Oh, all right. Well,
I love it.
roads be damned because Scott is now 16, eligible to drive. But was Scott driving to the mall while listening to the Smiths' Queen is Dead, Run DMC
No.
Raising Hell, or Cameo's Word Up?
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps he was hearing Janet Jackson's Control while dining at the first Five Guys Burgers and Fries. Or maybe Scott was at home watching the debut of Perfect Strangers or Alf. The theaters were bloated with bangers, Top Gun's #1, closely followed by Crocodile Dundee, Karate Kid 2, Back to School, and Aliens, in that order. People forget, but Back to School was more popular than Aliens. But was Scott Weinberg watching The Golden Child, Cobra, or Legal Eagles? Maybe he's more of a Soul Man fan. Is Scott Drebit a huge Soul Man fan? You heard it here first.
I saw Soul Man
Oh
in the
no.
theater.
No.
Oh yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, Dirk, what did I tell you? We went to everything. And again, this is when I was living in the Bahamas.
Right.
So,
How'd it play there?
how did it play? It didn't play particularly well. It didn't play particularly well for anyone.
Yes, true.
Wow, that's a movie.
Yeah.
That is a movie. That is not the movie
Oh,
that I
good.
chose, Dirk,
Then we can
for
air the episode
86.
then.
Instead, I went with David Cronenberg's The Fly.
Oh gosh. So again,
Yeah.
I just missed seeing this in the theater. I remember seeing the posters for it. I didn't know who Cronenberg was yet. And seeing this, I mean, I was pretty nervous with the effects and things, even though I was a gore kid. He just really pushes it in this movie into places that I was like, I'm going to have to grow into loving this because it's working right now the way I think it's intended to work. And now, of course, I completely adore it. But I just walk me through, like, were you, again, Cronenberg person at this time, or are you just seeing it and it's like, hey, it's a remake of the 50s Fly?
No, no, I was much more familiar with Cronenberg's work than I was with the original
Hmm.
Fly at that point in my life. No, by the time I was 16, my first Cronenberg would have been The Brood and Scanners,
Okay.
Videodrome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those would have been my first ones, and then a couple of the earlier ones, your Shivers and Rabid. But yeah, no, so by the time we got to Fly, I was very excited, and again, hadn't seen the original, but knew the basic plot and storyline. And I think, like everyone else, even as a 16-year-old kid, what struck me the most at the core was the love story
Mm-hmm.
between the two people, between Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. as much as I was sitting there wowed out and grossed out by those amazing
Yeah.
special effects, it's the characters that you remember all the years later with, I think, with The Fly, and that totally Romeo and Juliet type doomed relationship that they have is just incredible. It's like one of those almost absolutely perfect movies for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's probably his warmest relationship in any film, I would say. Cronenberg's like it's so obtusely sweet compared to like say the coldness of like Dead Ringers or something or some of the other films that absolutely love Cronenberg's works. And when I was learning about him, it was in our video store and it was like putting together the name is on this as well. And so I probably watched The Fly because I had seen his other films, like definitely Scanners,
Right.
and Videodrome, and I loved those, but they were like pretty dark and crazy for
Yeah.
how young I was. But then I just really fell in love with like the time that he would take to make. He had like a slower, methodical way of doing things that really allowed
Yeah.
you to get creeped out and stuff get under your skin, And yeah, I love his work, and I couldn't believe that we got like a 1997 Cronenberg movie just like last year. And then I'm super excited about like the new one that's coming out. I'm like, he's already finished Shrouds or whatever, and
Yeah.
I can't wait. He's one of my absolute favorite directors and actors. When he pops up in things, I'm like, whoop, he's in Nightbreed. What? Like it's just like,
Oh, if you have a chance, and maybe you've seen it already, but he stars in season 4 of the television series Slasher,
oh no, I
which
never watched
is
it.
okay. I think the subtitle is called Flesh and Blood. So it's a different. It's kind of like American Horror Story,
Okay.
but it's actually Canadian made, but they use some of the same cast that they turn over year after year, but it's a different story each year. And the story of Cronenberg is like a 10 Little Indians,
Oh,
Agatha Christie
okay.
type, but done like Italian giallo style. And
Whoa.
he's hilarious, and he's the patriarch of this family, and everyone's after his money. It's very funny, it's very droll, it's terrific. It came out, I think, 3 years ago or so, but it's yet a slasher, season 4, Flesh and Blood.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll watch that
check it out.
tonight. Yeah. Well, my guess for you was
There we go.
Howard the Duck. Is
Oh
so.
God, I did not see Howard the Duck in theaters, and I'm
Oh,
glad
what? Oh,
I didn't. I'm not a Howard the Duck fan.
I get it. I saw it in the theater with my grandma, and the part where there's ducks that have nipples, she tried to hide my
Yeah.
eyes, but she forgot that I was so young, so her hand hit the seat like a foot and a half above my head, and I ended up seeing ducks with nipples, which is a haunting image to still carry with myself to this day.
Apparently.
Yeah. RoboCop. Did I catch you in time? Are you still there? Remember when Paul McCrane gets all melty from toxic waste and then splats on a car? Imagine that movie without that scene. Would it still be good? Okay, bad example, RoboCop rules, but his death adds flavor. And you know what else adds flavor? Marshall's hot sauce. You can wake up any boring meal with habanero carrot curry or serrano ginger lemongrass, just to name a few. These delicious and flavorful sauces will have you grinning bigger than Tarman in Return of the Living Dead. Marshall's hot sauce even has a new line of seasonings, including an incredible barbecue rub, where they soak dates in whiskey and then freeze dry them and powder them to add a little sweetness with no added sugar. There's also chicken marinade and even a volcano sparkle that'll make your body melt, just like in the movie Body Melt. The best part is you can enter VHUS Podcast at checkout for 20% off. So liven up those meals and your taste buds at marshallshotsauce.com and enter VHS Podcast for 20% off. And now, back to the show. Well, time just keeps on ticking, and Scott is now 17, and it's 1987. A year away from a vote or adult bookstores, was he out on the town in Nike Air Force Ones listening to Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, Def Leppard's Hysteria, or Depeche Mode's Music for the Masses, or George Michael's Faith? Who can say? Perhaps he was at home eating Airheads while watching the Max Headroom TV show. Maybe he was at the local cinema to see Beverly Hills Cop 2, Platoon, or Fatal Attraction, which were the top three of that year, followed by The Untouchables, Lethal Weapon, Three Men and a Baby, and The Secret of My Success. But maybe Scott was more of a Dragnet, Robocop, or Spaceballs guy. What a crazy year 1987 was. Scott, what did you choose?
The last three I definitely saw: Dragnet, Spaceballs,
Ro-
and the other one,
Robocop?
and RoboCop, and the Untouchables. The first batch, I did not see any of those in the theater, and nor is my pick in there. My
Okay.
pick is well, he's made it twice onto our list.
No
It's John
way.
Carpenter's Prince of Darkness.
Oh, wow. That's not the one I thought you were going to say. You're a trick.
Okay.
You're such a trickster. Okay, walk me through this Prince of Darkness.
There is kind of an asterisk beside this because at the time, and I write about this one in a cut below, uh, I wasn't the biggest fan of it when I saw it in as that theatrical experience. I
Mm-hmm.
was a bit underwhelmed by it. I think the problem was that I came into it with the wrong energy or the wrong expectations, and I wasn't tuned into his particular wavelength on that movie during that viewing.
Yeah.
Every subsequent viewing, I've loved it more and more, and it's now kind of firmly ensconced in my top, definitely in my like top three, I think, of Carpenter's, just because it creates this mood as he does so well from start to finish, and I love a good apocalyptic vibe, and I think this one deals it, and I think the cinematography is terrific. He wasn't with Cundy anymore. He's with Gary Kibbe, who is also terrific. The music, acting, it's great. It's Carpenter uh, getting a whole lot of philosophical. It's very much, judged by the writing credit that he gives himself of Martin Quatermass,
Yeah.
who's, of course, he was a huge Nigel Neal fan, and this film is kind of that. It's very much in that spirit. So, yeah, Prince of Darkness definitely holds up for me from '87.
That is a fascinating pick. I only saw this one time, and like you said, it just wasn't my thing, and I own it. So you've convinced me to revisit it, which I should do if I buy something anyway. But yeah, I'm interested in seeing it 30 some odd years later. So, yeah.
Absolutely. You may have a different take on it. I find that, well, there's no barometer for it. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes perspectives shift
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they don't. It doesn't mean it happens with every movie, that's
Yeah.
for sure. I've had somewhere that I've tried to reassess that I hated from the '80s and give it another shot. It's a crapshoot. Sometimes I'll go, yeah, I was wrong. That's a really great movie. And then other times I'll go, no, I was spot on with that
Yeah.
one. That is still a piece of crap.
Yeah.
So you never know.
More often than not, for me, I find new things that I wasn't aware of then, shall we say. Like maybe a better understanding of lighting or cinematography or direction or writing. There's just things that I maybe was going off of, like whether I liked it or not, but didn't really apply any thought to it. So usually I can find things, or at least I can pinpoint, like, oh, this is what doesn't work for me. And that's okay too. But what I chose for you this year was I was cheating. I'm a cheater, and I chose multiple movies because I was like, I'll get it right this time. So I
Okay.
I guessed The Lost Boys, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, or The Running Man, and I was wrong on all three guesses.
Yeah, you know what? I never saw Nightmare on Elm Street 3 I saw the first two in theater. That was the first one that I didn't see theatrically and
Whoa.
that I saw on home video. And that's the one I wish I'd
Seen
seen
on theater, yeah.
theatrically, just because I think visually it's
Did
like
did you just miss
it's the
it?
best
How
for
did
me.
that seemed like you were so
It was just one of those things. I just missed it on its
uh
original cycle, and then like, well, it's gonna be those things were so huge on home video too. So like
yes.
3 months later, they're boom on
Yeah.
home video. So
It's
Yeah.
understandable. The
Yeah.
day is here. Scott is 18 years old. It's 1988. He can smoke cigarettes on airplanes because it's 1988. Or perhaps he was more of a gum guy who gets to witness the birth of bubble tape. But it's the soundtrack for his 1988. Is it Public Enemy's It'll Take a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back? The Pixies' Surfer Rosa? Van Halen's OU812? Or Ministry's Land of Rape and Honey? Was 18-year-old Scott at home watching Murphy Brown or Wonder Years while eating a pan from Little Caesars? Two great pizzas, one great prize. Or maybe Scott was at the theater watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Coming to America, Good Morning Vietnam, which ruled. But maybe Scott preferred Die Hard, Big, Beetlejuice, Willow, Twins, Colors, or Child's Play. There's a million correct answers here, but only one is actually true. Scott, what did you choose for 1988?
None of those. Although I saw about half of those in the
Okay.
theater.
Okay.
The Coming to America stretch in there.
Yeah.
One way or the other. Well, there's about three or four there that I saw in a row, and the rest, no,
No.
no.
Okay.
But it ain't in there. No, my pick. This one surprised me and still sticks out in my head because I had no idea it was coming out. I happened to open the newspaper. It was a Friday night at like 7. I'm going to go see a movie. And I was a transit fella, wasn't driving. So I knew I'd have to take a bus. So I opened the newspaper, and lo and behold, I see an ad for the sequel that I didn't know was coming to one of my all time favorite horror movies,
Oh
which
no.
was Phantasm 2.
Oh, I love it so much.
The ball is back.
You didn't see the first one in theaters, did you?
I wish
Oh.
I did not. I saw it on videotape. Yeah.
Now, the first time we corresponded, it was because you were doing a series on the Phantasm movies in podcast format,
Yes.
and I love the Phantasm series. It means a lot to me, and so I penned a heartfelt letter to you all, thanking you for the wonderful work that you were doing in championing these films, the original and the sequels. And that's the first time I ever reached out to you. And so, where can people find that?
Thank you very much for that. And I remember that very well. And it was very sweet of you. And it meant a lot to myself and Brian Christopher
Yeah, that's right.
from Daily Dead. We did, if you look on the Corpse Club podcast, Brian and I did a series 3 years ago,
somewhere,
maybe
somewhere.
four,
Who knows? Time's a
a
flat circle.
7 million.
Yep.
Who's to say?
No.
We looked at each movie and talked about each movie, and Dirk here was a huge supporter of that
Yes.
series, and
Loved it.
it's great that I can see him face to face and say thank you for that, because Brad was a real labor of love for Brian. Brian and I are fellow huge PH fans. I have my Phantasm tattoo.
Yes.
You know, my handle is at Phantasm 2, at,
Yeah.
but not because of this movie.
Right.
And people ask me that. The first movie is my favorite by far, but I had to use that handle because someone else already had
Right.
Phantasm. And I didn't think I would be using it in any kind of professional capacity whatsoever when I chose it 15 years ago. So
Perfect.
anyway, here we are. But Phantasm 2, yes. So yes, I was super psyched. I hopped on the bus and I liked it. I liked it a lot, but it didn't quite have the mystery of the original film, that kind of surrealism, that kind of cut up
Hmm.
reality that the first one has by, you know, I mean, when you cut a 3 hour movie down to an hour and a half, some logic flies out the window with it, but to the movie's advantage. Phantasm 2 has more of a linear plot. It's actually, of the entire series, it's probably my least favorite of the Phantasm movies. Now, that's being qualified because these are some of my favorite. It's my favorite horror series.
Yeah.
So
Same.
when I say Phantasm 2 is my least favorite of the series, I still think it's pretty good. And I think it's a good horror action movie. I was tickled pink that Coscarelli was allowed to play with some more money
Hmm.
and further the story. As we find out later, it may not feel like it's being furthered along so much when you watch this by itself. I certainly, to have the same ending essentially as the first movie, it kind of made me sit there a little at the end and go, huh, okay. But you know, time changes that perspective. The next movie comes along and it all starts to flow and not make more sense, but certainly I think sit together comfortably as as a franchise, and certainly sits very close in our hearts.
Yeah, my experience with it was I think it was my first Phantasm, and my friend Aaron. No, that can't be right. It gets tricky, but the years. But my friend Aaron and I watched it, and the part where he makes like the 4-barrel shotgun was such like a quintessential '80s like you make a cool weapon kind of thing. And we were just like,
Yeah.
this is the coolest thing ever. Reggie rules. And we loved it. It's definitely the first action horror movie I ever saw. And I just thought Coscarelli was like adding some different flavors into the whole thing. And obviously the first Phantasm is like so incredibly impactful to me. But it's the friendship of these two main characters that kind of switches a little bit as it goes on. But um, and then just the making of it, everything behind it, the fact that Coscarelli kept coming back to this, that Angus Scrimm kept being a part of it. It's just, in what other world would there be 5 films with Reggie? Like, it's just, you know, he's a very strange person to have be like a lead, and it works. I love it. So, man, Phantasm 2 on the big screen. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it worked for me,
Yeah.
like I said, I was tickled pink just for the fact that another one had materialized.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like this, it was like Christmas and a birthday all rolled into one, looking at this newspaper going, is this real? And I'm looking, and it's saying written and directed by Don
Yeah.
Coscarelli. Well, I think I flew
Done.
out of the house
Done.
to get there. I'm like, well, that's all I need to hear. If Mr. Coscarelli is in, then I'm there too.
Yeah, and Phantasm 2 has the part where the person gets turned over and the ball is in their face, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
that's
that
right. Yeah.
that image like freaked my friend and I out so much, but like in that way that you have to keep returning to it because you're just like, I can't believe it that and the drill sounds, man. I love Phantasm 2. It's not gonna
Great effects.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, I guessed Dead Ringers, so I was wrong
Okay.
again.
All right.
I just thought 18, who doesn't love a movie about twin gynecologists? But all right.
Again, so close.
So close.
The closest one the closest one you've actually been was The Lost Boys, but I never saw The Lost Boys in the theater.
Okay.
But I love that movie.
Yeah. Oh, me too. I'll send you a picture of the lounge part of our podcast studio, which is called the Lost Boys Lounge, and it has giant posters of Alex Winter and Kiefer Sutherland, and then it has a mobile of them hanging under the bridge.
Nice.
And when people stay over, this part of the studio becomes the guest room, and so the couch folds out and people sleep beneath those giant posters, which includes my parents when they stay here. So I
Love it.
find it endlessly hilarious. It is sad but inevitable that we've reached 1989, and Scott has reached his final year as a teen. Scott is 19, a time of turmoil as Pat Sajak quits Wheel of Fortune for a late night talk show nobody remembers. Luckily, Scott could be satiated by Wendy's debuting a 99-cent menu consisting of the junior bacon cheeseburger, side salad, and small frosty. Musically speaking, what a year. The Beastie Boys release Paul's Boutique, Madonna releases Like a Prayer. At the same time, Nine Inch Nails releases Pretty Hate Machine, and Nirvana releases Bleach. 1989, people. But things are even wilder in the theaters, with Scott ordering a classic Coke, which was the #1 selling soda after the New Coke nightmare I mentioned previously, while he waited in line to see Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, or Lethal Weapon 2? 1989, people. Maybe he wasn't at the theater at all. Maybe he was at home bewildered by the finale of Webster, which featured Webster being beamed up to the USS Enterprise by Worf. Yes, that's really how the season ended. That's how they ended all of Webster. The cute little show about the tiny little boy. He's warped into space by Worf. Anyway, maybe he was at the cinema watching Pet Sematary, The Abyss, or Turner and Hooch. Scott, what did you choose for your final year of Screen Teens, 1989?
What was the first movie you chose in that list?
I chose Batman.
Batman. Batman I saw because everyone went and saw
Yeah,
Batman.
literally everybody.
That was just everybody did. That was just monstrous and huge. Now, 89, this took me forever because it was just it was getting dry out there, and the '90s were around the corner, and I have a lot of issues with the front half of the '90s as far as horror goes. It was just there was a sparsity of horror. Just there just wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
lot. So anyway, enough yakking about, as we say here up in Canada. I'm going to go with, and almost with a slight shrug of the shoulders, but I have somewhat of an appreciation for it, is A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 Dream Child.
Okay, so when I rewatched all the Nightmare on Elm Streets, that's
Yeah.
the one that changed the most for me.
Okay. From in what way?
Well, because I think a lot of people refer to it as like a punching bag of the sequels, and because it's like Baby Freddy. But when I rewatched it, I thought the special effects, for one, were really incredible. I thought stylistically, the way it's shot and the cinematography was really creative, and I just really enjoyed it. I don't know. I it went from being something that I was like, oh god, I got to watch that one, to like, I really like Dream Child.
I think I enjoyed Dream Master more,
hmm
but you're right. Five does have its own flavor to it
hmm
and its own style, and I do appreciate it. It could just be a case of I was at the time I was seeing it. It was a little maybe case of a little bit of Freddy fatigue.
hmm
I mean, these were literally coming out a year after another. And when you have that short of a space of time, it's hard to even forget the previous year's image before you get the next one. So you
Right.
have no choice but to compare because you're literally putting it right in front of me while it's still the outlines are still burning on my
Yeah,
retinas,
yeah.
from the previous ones. So that makes it harder. But I'll always watch it if it's on, and I'll even throw it on sometimes because I do enjoy it visually, especially.
Yes.
I like some of the choices that were made. I like the look. I like the feel of it. I'm okay with a little bit of a downer too. I would think it's nice to have Freddie
hmm
be a little bit. He should be a little dour, really. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
he's a child killer, so you should make him a little bit poopy,
Yeah. Yeah. They should have just called it Nightmare on Elm Street a little poopy.
a little poopy,
A little poopy.
a little poopy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it just really was shocking to me when I rewatched it, uh how much I enjoyed it. And then the person I was talking to about these films was like did not have that experience really. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess so. It just really caught me off guard with how stylistic, and I missed that from those films. Those just those weird practical things or the miniatures and stuff. I don't know. There's something like when you
Yeah.
revisit The Crow, which is going to be a remake next year. Uh,
Hmm.
there's just it's going to be CG stuff because they're not going to film these miniatures flying around like the camera going down, and there's parts of the car sequences that are all miniatures, and it just gives it this flavor that's like weird and odd sitting in your head. Let me run
Yeah.
an idea by you because
Mm.
this is how I think they should bring back Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay.
I think that they should have a new Nightmare movie come out and have, let's say, 3 dream sequences per film that are directed by different directors. Because if you're using dream nightmare logic, you can do anything. You can technically, in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, do every other horror movie. So, because it's in a dream, right? So you could have
Mm.
like an animated, like a Studio Ghibli dream sequence in the movie, and then the film itself is like just a wraparound because like these characters are gonna die or whatever. So you would go to
Yeah.
the theater to see like, yeah, did you hear that there's a Christopher Nolan dream sequence in the new Nightmare on Elm Street? And people would be like, what does that look like? And they're like, I don't know, I got to see it on the theater. Or like Cronenberg did one, and each director gets 20 minutes of the film to just like the only rule is of course the kid dies at the end of the sequence or whatever it is. It's like because
Yeah.
Freddy can look like anything, so
Yeah.
why are they always like and then they're in a boiler room? It's like what? He could do anything. Like you could think you're in the Bahamas, like they eventually do that where he's like on a beach and it's like but you could go huge with it and wild, like Mike directing Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, come on, give me that.
If if you're using all of these people, this Nightmare on Elm Street is going to have a budget of
Yeah.
$600 million. It's
Also,
going to need to clear 3 billion to break even.
also, it's $600 million. I didn't
Yeah.
tell you that part, but I just think it'd be amazing if these
No,
directors
that's it.
did
That's
short films.
I love the idea. The only thing I would say from a viewer's standpoint that it would take away from the certainly the flow of the story, or the
Yeah.
if it then it becomes just about the set pieces, which would be cool and amazing.
Yep.
Maybe as if they were to do a Freddy anthology film, as it
Mhm.
were, so that you have one protagonist who goes through, and then
Right.
what you're getting, instead of people, you're paying $80 for an IMAX ticket. It's a Nightmare on Elm Street. Why am I paying for IMAX? Christopher Nolan
he,
did it.
he did it. You just have to see his part, and then you go to a different
Yeah.
theater for the rest. Yeah, I just think because everyone's like, well, who would play Freddy is always the thing, and especially after that remake. And I just think like, well, this way he could just do voiceover. Like his voice could come out of anything at any time. I don't know why they're always like, but look, it's Freddy, because you're like, all right, well, I mean, I don't know, but that was just me. So excellent
I like it.
selection for 19. My guess, so close, was Beaches.
So-
So barely missed it.
Sad to say I missed that in the theaters.
Oh, what about Prince of
Sad to
Tides?
say I missed it on home video. Which one? Prince of Tides? Is that what you're
Yeah,
going to
did you
say?
see that one?
That's right. I missed Beaches because I was busy watching Prince of Tides at the theater.
I saw both. It's a very sad time for young Dirk. Well, Scott, thank you so much for playing along for Screen Teens.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, the book is A Cut Below, a celebration of
Yes.
B-horror movies, 1950s to 1980s. But if you just search A Cut Below, that's what popped up for me. Scott Drebit is the author. One more time, where people can find you and your book.
You can find me on the socials, Twitter at Phantasm. 2, the number, that is. Blue Sky, which is honestly, where I prefer to hang, at S Drebit or at Scott Drebit. I'm out there. Just use my name. I don't hide.
There you go.
It's not an alias. It's really me. Would I make that name up? Why would I make that name up? It's me. And the book is available everywhere. Just ask your favorite bookseller. Bring it in. I think if you love celebrating B-horror movies, then I've written a book with that title literally there. So you should buy it.
There it is. As always, I'm Dirk Marshall, and this has been VHS.
Would you really want